The 18 Strong Podcast, episode number 156 with Mike Boyle from Mike Boyle Strength and Conditioning.
The problem is people's perception of functional training, not functional training. And the other thing I always look at is, I always say functional training is the application of functional anatomy to training. So we're looking at the way the body actually works, and then we're saying, why don't we train that way?
Welcome to the 18 Strong Podcast, where you get direct access to the world's greatest experts on training harder, practicing smarter, and playing better golf. Now, here's your host, Jeff Pellizzero.
Hello, and welcome to another episode of the 18 Strong Podcast. I'm your host, Jeff Pellizzero, where it's our mission to bring you some of the best and brightest coaches, professionals in the world of strength and conditioning, golf, fitness, nutrition, anything and everything really that can help you improve both on the course and off the course, and hopefully eventually help you drop scores so you can play some better golf. This week we have a guest that I've been hoping to get on the show basically since the podcast started, which is almost 3 years now, which is hard to believe. But Coach Mike Boyle is one of the top strength and conditioning coaches in the world. And when I say that, I mean he has really impacted a lot of the strength and conditioning and fitness and medical professionals that I know based on just the content that he's put out and the training and coaching that he's done. And Mike, just to give you some background on him, he's got quite a bio, but I want to give you a little insight into how well respected he is and some of the things he's done. In 1996, Mike started his strength and conditioning facility, Mike Boyle Strength and Conditioning, which is one of the largest facilities dedicated to training athletes, probably in North America. But previous to that, Mike was the head strength coach at Boston University for 15 years. He's been the head strength coach for the Boston University hockey team for at least 25 years. He worked with the Red Sox in 2003 when they won the World Series. He worked with the Boston Bruins from 1991 to 1999. He was the head strength coach for the women's U.S. Olympic hockey team when they won the gold medal in Nagano, and in 2014 when they won the silver in Sochi. And he's also been a consultant with the USA Hockey program for their national team developmental program in Ann Arbor, Michigan. So obviously he's got quite a bio, quite a bit of experience, but he travels around teaching, coaching, and has really influenced a lot of the fitness and strength professionals listening to this show, I know, and just a lot of my peers. And so it's really an honor to have Mike on the show this week. And we got to talk about a lot of different things. Specifically, we talked about the term functional training because we hear that so often and don't necessarily really have a great idea of what that definition is. So I wanted Mike to give us a bit of that definition, being that he's one of the guys that's kind of, labeled with that term quite often. Then we talk about the evolution of a strength coach, which kind of stemmed from an article that Mike wrote a long time ago, kind of walking through the typical progression of how we think as fitness coaches, medical professionals, and the mindset that he went through. And it really resonated with me when I read it, and hopefully it will with you as well. And it kind of shows how we get smarter as we kind of age a little bit. And then we talk about the debate in golf with all these golfers training harder but getting hurt, and where's the correlation? Is there a correlation? And then finally, this is kind of a tease for all the for all the golf fitness professionals, all the medical professionals, and even the golf instructors in the crowd. But Mike gives you basically the greatest sales pitch that you can use to get more clients, to help build your business based on what you do on a daily basis. So definitely stay tuned to the end of the show for that. Before we jump into the interview, as always, I just want to say thanks to our sponsor for this week's episode, which is, again, the PGA Tour mobile app. It's my go-to app for anything related to the PGA Tour, so I can check up on scores of some of my favorite players, Jordan Spieth, Justin Thomas, some of those guys battling it out, seeing what's going on, maybe at the end of the rounds on the weekend if I'm not able to sit in front of the TV and catch that last little bit, which has been super exciting here for the FedEx Cup playoffs. So if you haven't checked out the PGA Tour mobile app, there's so many great features. They've made it so much easier to use, and you're really able to capture a lot of the information as well as some of the social media stuff and different things going on the tour. But as far as the play-by-play, it's really a fantastic tool. So you can find that on any device, for your Samsung, for your iPhone, your BlackBerry, whatever it is. Check out the PGA Tour mobile app. All right, let's not take any more time, and let's jump into this episode with the one and only Coach Mike Boyle. Coach Mike Boyle, welcome to the 18 Strong podcast. I can't thank you enough for your time this morning.
Thank you very much for having me. It's a pleasure.
Absolutely. I had the chance to see you at the World Golf Fitness Summit back in 2014. And then obviously we had Anthony Renna on the show a little while back, and we were talking about you, and he was nice enough to make the introduction. So just really excited to bring you on and talk about a lot of different things, not just in the golf world, but obviously just in the training world. And I think first and foremost, one of the terms that is thrown around a lot today that obviously I think you are one of the main guys in this world is functional training. And I'd like to just get your kind of definition of what that might be, because I know that there's a lot of different thoughts around what that actually means, what that looks like, and whether it's good or bad or in between.
Well, I mean, I think it's really good if it's done correctly. And I think we need to look, there's sort of two definitions that I look at. One, if I think of what is an item's function, we're asking what's its purpose. So if we substituted the word purpose for function, functional training is purposeful training. So how that can be bad is well beyond me. I think the problem is people's perception of functional training, not functional training. And the other thing I always look at is, I always say functional training is the application of functional anatomy to training. So we're looking at the way the body actually works, and then we're saying, why don't we train that way? And again, I don't know how anybody can argue with that one. If you look at that and say, when we look at things like, crunches or two-legged squatting, or there's so many things that we do that we say, we've always, I always say in my presentations, what if the way we've always done it was wrong? I stole that from Lee Cockrell from Creating Magic, but it's true. What if the way we always did it was wrong? And I don't know why people are so tied into that idea that, we can't be wrong. It couldn't have been wrong, whatever. Because even think about training, how many years, what do we have? 40, 50 years. I have slides in my presentation of 1922 where they show single leg squatting and then double leg squatting, and they talk about double leg squatting being a variation of single leg squatting. So, this idea that with this sort of, I always say it's like, I don't know what the word is, a wide world of sports idea. And you're a little young to remember wide world of sports, but we had powerlifting on and Olympic lifting on, and all this stuff was on TV, and people eventually they started to think that's training. That's how you train. You do these other sports, and then that helps you get better at your sport. And all we started doing, guys like me or guys like Mark Verstegen or Greg Cook or some other people, is started to ask some simple questions along that idea of, well, wait a second, have we been like copying the wrong guy? I always, the same thing in my seminars, I talk about copying is a really good thing. But if you were in school and you sat next to the dumbest guy in class and copied all his stuff, you would do poorly. But if you went and sat next to the smartest guy in class and copied all his stuff, you would do well. And I think sometimes we just haven't copied the right people. We haven't look into this. People should look into some of the Franz Bosch stuff. There's so much stuff out there that validates what I believe, but it's not mainstream. And the reality is I'm fine with it, because I think it helps those of us who are ahead to stay ahead when everybody else wants to sort of go with the ostrich idea of, I'm going to stick my head in the sand, I'm going to put my fingers in my ears, I'm not listening to Mike Boyle, I can't hear him. And somebody posted something on Twitter the other day. Remember when Mike Boyle said that two-legged squatting was a bad idea and everybody laughed at him? And it turns out that he's right. And that's an interesting kind of juxtaposition over a 6 or 7 year period, because when I first said it, the internet like blew up, and I was heretical and blaspheming, and how could I possibly say these things? The people posted whole videos of what an idiot I was. So one thing you'll realize, I'll give really long answers to really short questions.
No, I love it. That's one of the things that I love is how practical you relate things and how you just kind of lay it out. And everything that I read that you've written, or the times I've seen you speak online or in person, I just like how you kind of break it down very simply, and it always seems to make sense once we hear you kind of give the reasons why. And I'd like to go to something I heard you say about just kind of your progression of your thought process in training, both training yourself and training your athletes, from when you were younger to where you are now, and how your thought process is, because I feel like it's a lot of the same way that most of us kind of go through. I think you talked about, the bodybuilding mentality, and then you get the aches and pains and things like that. So if you could expand on that a little bit.
Yeah, I mean, that article I actually wrote was called Evolution of a Coach or Evolution of a Strength Coach or something. The bad part is I don't even remember the names of the articles that I write sometimes, because I'm almost like stream of consciousness. I sit down and I just write what's in my head, and then I forget. Sometimes I look at stuff and think, wow, I didn't even know I wrote that. But Evolution of a Strength Coach was just talking about how I think we all started out, everybody who was in the field of whatever, strength training, with this idea that I want to look better. I want to meet girls. Do you know what I mean? I want to be able to go to the beach and take my shirt off. I mean, that is the common starting point for just about everybody. So I wrote the article and I said, basically, everybody starts out as a bodybuilder. Whether they kind of wanted to be or not, or whether that was their mission, but they saw a muscle magazine, they saw some guy that looked good. Now, the modern day version of that is everybody starts out as an underwear model. Do you know what I mean? Everybody wants to be the guy in the J. Crew catalog or the guy in the Guess Jean thing with the girl draped all over him. But it's all the same idea in terms of initially it is very driven by appearance. And then what happens is, and this is what I said in the article, you realize that the big, strong guys at the gym are laughing at you like, look at that guy over there. He's got no legs and all he's doing is curls and benching and looking at himself in the mirror. He's such a loser. And then you get fascinated with strength and you start to think, oh, now I really understand training and I'm going to get really strong. Eric Cressy just wrote a great article that I read online where he was talking about how at 22, he thought all his clients wanted to deadlift 600 pounds and be 6% body fat. Do you know what I mean? So that, sort of like, it's kind of like everywhere you are is where your clients are. And you don't necessarily know that at the time. It's just that that's sort of the way the progression goes. And then you go, I said, the next progression is the injured power lifter. Suddenly you've been lifting heavy weights and all of a sudden you're icing your shoulders or your back hurts or you start to get a little disc problem and you get pain going down your legs or, whatever it is that makes you start to think, wait a second, am I nuts? I'm not really getting better. I'm getting worse. Effectively, I'm really strong. Look at me. I'm huge. I'm strong and I'm in constant pain. And, it hurts to get out of bed. And then you become the functional training guy. You start to realize that the Mike Boyle that you laughed at suddenly seems a lot smarter. And that's, I think, in reality, and I've seen this, you can look, and I won't name names because it's probably disrespectful to some of these guys, but there's so many of the go heavy or go home guys of the internet 10 years ago that are now functional training and mobility guys. Because they screwed up their body, and then you see them on a podcast or something like this. They talk about the fact that, I've had a couple spinal fusions, and I've had this, and I've had that, and now I realize how important it is to warm up and to foam roll and to stretch. And when I was younger, I never did that. And I always say the big advantage that I have is I'm almost 58 years old, and I did everything that I talk about. I already did, and sometimes I look at people and think, why won't you listen? I already screwed this all up, right? I'm not trying to sell you anything, and then people think I am. I'm trying to sell DVDs. The truth is, I don't really care. I can sell plenty of stuff without trying to sell it, so it doesn't make any difference to me. I'm not at this stage of my life financially driven. I'm really information driven in terms of I actually want to help people. I would like to see people, hey, avoid the pain. Don't be, and then think about golf. I mean, again, what's the absolute strength requirement of golf? Probably a little bit on the low side compared to American football. But we look at everything here in the U.S. under an American football lens because those are the guys who influence us. And they were the guys that influenced me. I can remember going to the first NSCA conventions and then all of a sudden seeing some track coaches talking, thinking, wow, Don Chu, Vern Gambetta, oh my God, I'm trying to think of Brett's name right now. But there was a bunch of these guys who started to show up and talk about just this idea that maybe it isn't just about benching 400 and squatting 600, and there might be more to this than the absolute strength requirement. And I remember sitting there thinking, they might be right, even though I was still probably a little bit of that guy. But it's funny because now I have athletes that I coach that are also 58 years old because I started coaching. I was 21 and some of the seniors were 21. And I see guys sometimes now and they're like, my God, we were light years ahead of everybody else when we were doing this in the 80s. Mm-hmm. Because we were already doing unilateral training. We were doing things that most people weren't doing because for me, I was being really heavily influenced by some of these track guys. Brent McFarlane was the guy's name. He's since passed away. He was a Canadian track coach. But, I started reading Charlie Francis stuff. I started to look at the track and field thing and think, okay, if we really want to run fast and we really want to jump high and we really want to apply all this to sport, we should probably look at what these guys are doing and not be so enamored of just what some other football guy is doing.
Right.
So I guess in a way, I was always just smart enough to sit next to the right guy. That's the way I'd like to emphasize it, in the sense that when I first met Mark Verstegen, when I met Mark, I could have been jealous of Mark. I could have been dismissive of Mark. He was 10 years younger than me. Instead, I was like, man, this kid's sharp. I'm gonna sit and talk to him for as long as I possibly can. And through Mark, I met guys like Brandon Marcello and Craig Friedman and lots of other guys that were really good coaches. And I expanded my network, and and then I met. I made a point one time of going to meet Gray Cook. I drove to a seminar that he was doing, and just walked in and introduced myself to him because I was like, this guy's smart. He gets it. And every time there was somebody like that, Stuart McGill, I went to Stuart's seminar and I went right up and introduced himself, said who I was, what I was doing. And I've been able, people are like, oh, you know everybody. And I'm like, well, I know everybody because I'd go to the seminar, I'd sit in the front row, I'd introduce myself, and then I'd take their information and I'd use it. And then I'd give them credit for the fact that I was using it instead of saying it was my idea. So I felt like I did everything kind of the right way in the right order. With Mark Verstegen, I went down to IPI long before Exos, long before Athletes Performance, probably now approaching 20 years ago, and said, hey, can I come down and hang out and watch what you guys do? And as a result, I've built this incredible network of people. And that's why, like Greg, you talk about World Golf Summit. Greg Rose is the same way. He's really smart. Greg looked at what I was doing and said, what you're doing really applies to golf. You should come to the World Golf Fitness Summit. Al Vermeil should come to the World Golf Fitness Summit. Greg Cook should come to the World Golf Fitness Summit. And you get out there and they were like, like the idiots like attaching clubs to pulleys, you know what I mean? It was almost like, you wanted to look at these guys and be like, seriously? Like, this is what we're up against. And then you realize, same shit, different day. Exactly. In terms of, whether it was, so many other sporting situations that we've been in.
Well, you mentioned talking about the different sports and how different things apply. And first of all, I love the fact that you reached out to these different guys. These different guys were willing to let you come in. I mean, that's what I noticed about some of the best coaches is not only are they willing to learn, but they're also willing to share their ideas and, share their different concepts because they're not afraid of that what they're teaching is their secrets or anything like that. And so I think that's phenomenal. I want to talk about the golfers specifically, and we can kind of jump into the World Golf Fitness Summit and why you were there and what you talked about. But you mentioned the golf specific type stuff. And what do you see as far as how fitness has come into golf? What are the pros? What are the cons? And obviously, there's a big debate on, some of these top-notch golfers that are getting injured. And then there's the argument from a lot of the media that, it's the training that's causing this stuff. I know I threw a lot at you right there, but I'll just let you go.
Yeah. So, I mean, the funny thing is some of the media people could be right. When I see like Rory McIlroy, doing these massive deadlifts, and they're like, oh, you can deadlift, whatever, 405. And I'm kind of like, I don't know if that really, if I was training a guy with that type of earning potential, I'm not sure that would be the way that I would train him. But the flip side, Tiger, the reason Tiger's hurt is because he got too big. And I'm like, well, something? He got too big and he dominated the game and he changed the game. And you want to look at that. There's a whole bunch of other guys that should try to maybe train like Tiger and be as good as he was for even a year of his career, much less for whatever, the 10 years that he dominated the game. And maybe he won't dominate the senior tour. But if someone looked at it, it's sort of that deal with the devil. All right, you're going to train. You may beat yourself up a little bit. You're going to be the greatest golfer in the history of the game. But you might break down a little bit at the end. Is there anybody who's not making that trade?
Right.
I would say probably not. So, but, could he have trained smarter? I don't know. I wasn't there. I didn't look at what he did. I think my gut reaction would be, yes, he could have. Someone would look at me and say, could you have trained him better? Yeah, maybe I could have. I don't know. I wasn't there. But, when you get a guy who ends up with back surgery and knee surgery and on painkillers, then you're thinking, maybe, one of the things I've always said is there's this continuum of training in the sense that what gets you good in the beginning is not what keeps you good in the long run. And you've got to be able to, again, much like the evolution of the coach, there has to be the evolution of the trainee. Like And I never finished it. I should finish it. I wrote an article, started writing an article called Training the Same Athlete for 17 Years about this guy, Jay Pandolfo, that I trained from college all the way through his NHL career ending, which encompassed a 17-year period. When he showed up as an 18-year-old freshman, he could bench press 300 pounds. And I remember looking at him thinking, you know something, Jay, I don't care if you ever bench press more than 300 pounds. That's plenty for a hockey player. You're good. We get a lot of other stuff to work on. You know, we're going to work on your legs. But, I mean, at that time, we back squatted and we power cleaned. And, you know, we did a lot of stuff that we don't do anymore. By year 14, 15, he was the epitome of the functional training guy, you know, in the sense it was all one-leg squats and plyos, and you know, we weren't doing any spinal loading stuff anymore. Everything was like super joint friendly because we wanted him to be able to go back and play again. So I think part of it is that you don't have a system per se where everybody has to adhere to the system. You just have an idea about training. I know what I want the training to be like, and I want you to get better. Do you know what I mean? Like if you look at golf and it's like, okay, if you're not, you know, it's like in running, you know, if you're not getting faster, then the training's not working. You know, in golf, if you're not hitting the ball further, then the training's not working. I don't care how good you look in your sponsor shirt. That doesn't make any difference to me. What I care about is what's your, you know, ultimately from our standpoint, what's your driving distance? Because that's really what we're trying to change. I mean, I tell people all the time, I'm buddies with Brad Faxon, great putter. I can't change short game. You know what I mean? I don't know shit about golf to begin with, but I know enough to have the conversation and to be dangerous. But I know that there's nothing that I'm going to do that's going to make you better on the greens. Nothing. But I also know there's a lot that I'm going to do that might help you get there sooner and make better. You know, I can remember James Driscoll was one of the first, good golfers that we trained. And one of the things that he told me, you know, we were talking, I was kind of like, trying to figure out how the whole thing works. And he said it's really about club selection. It's about being able to use a better club sooner, about being able to be more accurate faster. And that guy, because, you know, and Greg had this, if you watch Greg's presentation, one of the things that Greg said is that the most accurate guys lose their tour cards, and the guys that drive the furthest are the stars of the tour. Mm-hmm. And that's reality because they get to a more accurate club faster. You know, it's almost like saying, okay, you know, here's the game of darts, you know, the first dart, you have to hit the board from, 50 yards away. But then if you do that, you get to stand 3 feet away from the board and try to throw a bullseye.
Right.
You're like, okay, I get it. You know what I mean? And that's where you said it makes sense. Like people don't think. My problem with people in general, and maybe why, I become a golf expert and I can't golf, is because I have common sense. Because I ask questions. I look at people and say, hey, how does this whole thing work? What makes you successful? What's going to, if I could make you better, what would I do? And ultimately, when you talk about someone like Greg, it's power. Well, what I could make you do is able to drive the ball further. Now we realize, and again, think about this. The long drive guys 10 years ago were monsters. Absolute freaking monsters. Now they're not. Now they're smaller, much more athletic, and so now it's probably more club head speed and less strength. But yet you look at it and think, there's some sweet spot probably in there between, much like in any other athletic endeavor, you gain strength and muscle mass to a certain point and it becomes beneficial. Beyond that, it probably ceases to be beneficial. It's knowing that, okay, I did part one. I need to now shift more heavily into part two and worry less about part one. Mm-hmm. So like for us, we do like zero bodybuilding. You know what I mean? It's like, it just isn't like, I do not care. I always feel like, sort of form follows function. You're going to look really good because we train right. You're not going to look really good because we train you to look really good. And if you came in and looked at my male or female athletes, you would be like, you're spot on. Because your guys look unbelievable and your girls look unbelievable. And I'm like, yeah, and we don't make any effort at all to do that. But I always say to people, go to the World Track Championships and try to find somebody in the sprints or jumps who you don't like the way they look.
Yeah, no kidding.
Right? I mean, in females, 0%. I mean, the best female athletic specimens that you're going to see will be at those track meets running around. Form follows function. What do? They sprint, they jump. Okay, again, the logic guy in me says, hey, sprinting and jumping is probably really good for you and will result in lots of these muscles that are actually going to really benefit you in doing the things that we need to do. So.
Hey guys, just want to take a quick second here to thank our featured sponsor for today's episode, which is Rad Roller. And I want to share some news with you between Rad Roller and 18 Strong and something pretty cool that's happening. We're going to have a Rad Roller Mobility and Rad Golf certification course here in St. Louis in November 12th. We're going to be doing the Level 1 Rad Mobility and Level 1 Golf certification courses. There's going to be more information coming out in the near future, but I want to let you guys know ahead of time so you can make your plans if you want to travel to St. Louis. It's going to be hosted at my home base, the home of 18 Strong, which is Empire Fitness Academy here in St. Louis. So there's going to be more details. I'll put them on the show notes page for this episode number 156, but we'll also be promoting it via our social media and other platforms there as well. But stay tuned to find out more information on the Rad Mobility course. Once again, some of the greatest soft tissue myofascial release products out in the market, which is why we stand by them here at 18 Strong. If you want any more information on the actual products, just go to radroller.com. You can find all the information there. Be sure to use the code 18STRONG to get your discount, and then keep your eye out for some more of the information on the certification course. Again, November 12th here in St. Louis. All right, let's get back to Coach Boyle. You know, there's something or a couple things that you mentioned that I want to highlight. First is regarding the power and driving distance. Obviously, that's what 90 to 95% of the golfers want when they look for anything golf fitness related. And I would tie into that, feeling better and getting their joints moving better. But another thing you mentioned is training an athlete for a long period of time. And this is something that I don't hear talked about all that much with golf, but I think it's something that's big and kind of missed out on. Is golf is something that we can play from when we're 5 years old to when we're 85 years old. But I feel like, sometimes information is just kind of lumped into that one, okay, this is golf fitness and this is what you need to do to be a golfer. So looking at the power, looking at the ranges of different people that we're going to be training, or if you're a golfer listening, the ranges of type of exercise you're going to want to do, how do we account for that power over the course of years? Because obviously a younger athlete can handle a lot more. An older athlete might not have time to learn some of the power techniques so how do you guys approach that in different phases or working on power with different athletes?
Well, in general, one of the things, I think everybody who's young should learn to Olympic lift. Absolutely, positively. And then it's funny because I'm very anti-CrossFit. Everybody who's old should not learn to Olympic lift. Once you get to a certain point in time, there's too much water under the bridge. You're not going to be a good Olympic lifter. But I would like every kid, in their teens and maybe even almost preteens. Like my son is 12. He's not a bad Olympic lifter right now at 12 years old. He's been cleaning since he was probably 10 and a half. And he's getting decent at it. But there may come a time when I look and think, we may need to switch to snatches because the load is too heavy. There may become a time when I think, hey, we're just going to do jumps because, your back doesn't tolerate having a load in your hands anymore. And I think that's the difference and that's why I talk about this idea, progression, regression, respecting the body and looking at somebody and saying, okay, this doesn't work for you anymore. And I actually need to write a note because I'm going to write an article called Closing Your Hand in the Car Door. Because I had a conversation with a guy the other day, and I use this analogy all the time, but I've never written it. And while I'm talking to you, I'm going to be writing a note. So if I look like I'm distracted, it's absolutely because I am. But if I don't write these ideas down, I won't remember them. But the basic thought process is so this guy emails me and he said, I hurt my back, and every time I get back to where I want to be squatting, I hurt my back again. I said, well, here's my analogy for you. I said, it's like you just imagine, let's just substitute, I hurt my hand closing it in the car door. And then every time my hand gets better, I try to close it in the car door again. And it hurts. And he goes, I showed that to my wife, and my wife laughed and said, that makes so much sense. I said, well, that's what you're trying. That's what you're doing. Like, the mechanism of your injury. And yet you're training so that you can eventually repeat the mechanism of your injury. And you've got to be able to look at that and think, wow, that's really stupid. I know how I get hurt. And I've been hurt more. Like I say with squatting, I used to, even with my college kids, I'd say 3 strikes and you're out. You get hurt squatting 3 times. We're not squatting anymore. And really, I got to a point where it was 2 strikes and you're out. You know what I mean? If at one point, you got a back spasm and you said, hey, my back hurts, and we went back to squatting, it never bothered you again, I never worried about it. But if it happened again, I was like, you know something? For whatever reason, this isn't working for you. We need to do something else. We need to think about one leg squats or belt squats or, whatever our alternatives were at that point in time. And people just don't want to do that. I read an article one time, and I won't say who the guy was by, but he was talking about having a shoulder replacement done and thinking about how soon he could get back to bench pressing. And I thought, that might be the dumbest thing I've ever read. I mean, that you value some exercise so much that you could let somebody cut your arm off and put it back together again with the idea that so that you could get back to the activity that, in effect, caused them to cut your arm off in the first place. Absolutely absurd.
It's amazing. It just goes back to that whole common sense thing. Which,
right.
It boggles my mind. And so speaking of some of these exercises and especially the squats, I'd like to talk a little bit about kind of the idea of the unilateral training, because obviously you're a huge proponent of it, and you're probably the person that I've heard educate most on it. And the whole idea of, and I didn't even know this term until I started reading through even more of your stuff, but bilateral deficit. If you could kind of explain that and why you have really shifted most of your training with your athletes to more the unilateral stuff than some of the bigger things like back squats.
Yeah, well, I mean, the beauty of it is I found out about bilateral deficit after the fact. So the reason that we switched to unilateral training was for the exact reason that we said. What we found, as a college strength and conditioning coach, let's just say that I at that time, will take a round number, I'm dealing with 300 athletes. Of those 300 athletes, 30 to 60 of them would have back pain that would be directly related to squatting. 10 to 20%. It just always seemed that way. And no matter how well we did it, no matter how good the technique was, it just seemed like 10 to 20% of people's backs didn't tolerate back squatting very well. So eventually what I did is I eliminated back squatting and I went to just front squatting. And I probably managed to get that 10 to 20 down to 10. But you're still talking about, if there's 300 athletes, you're talking about 30 people who have a problem. Now, if you take that and apply that into a professional sporting situation, and some of those people are your better players, or a tour group, and some of those guys are the best players, that can be really problematic when you keep insisting that, I want to put this square peg in the round hole, and I'm going to keep banging at all costs. And that's what people do. So eventually I said, hey, we're going to do more unilateral training. Then I had a conversation, and it's really funny. So I had a conversation with one of my old assistants, a guy named Jeff Oliver, who's at College of the Holy Cross out in Worcester, kind of a smaller, they still play like 1AA football. They've got a pretty good athletic program. And he doesn't remember the conversation. I gave him credit for this, and he said, I don't ever remember saying this, but he did. He said, if we could test single leg strength, would you stop doing the double leg stuff? And I said, yeah, I think I would. I think if I could find some way to evaluate, because I do believe that evaluation creates progress. If we're not testing, there's a certain percentage of people that aren't going to be trying to get better. Mm-hmm. And then one day, of all people, Joe DeFranco, another go heavier, go home, big back squat guy, tire flips, all that stuff. I saw a video of one of his athletes doing what we call a rear foot elevated split squat, what some people call, the ultimate misnomer, Bulgarian lunge. Like, it's not Bulgarian, it's not a lunge, so you're 0 for 2. But in any case, the guy was doing it with 120-pound dumbbells, and I was like, well, that's a shitload of weight. That's 240 pounds. I started thinking, and I think he did 5 easy reps. And I was like, man, that's like 480 for 5, if you think what he was doing if he had 2 legs. That's pretty impressive. Then I started thinking about the idea, but yeah, the back stress is still 240. Mm-hmm. Because, so he can get, in what I've tried to explain to people, he can get the leg stress of 480 with the back stress of 240. So that's a really good trade. And then, and I think it was another friend of mine, Robbie Bork, was the one who actually sent me the stuff about bilateral deficit, because what we started to see was our athletes were actually handling weights in excess of what we ever thought they could handle on one leg. So the last year that I did this, the year before I actually made the switch, I tested my Boston University hockey players. So you get 20 Division I players. I think we either had won the national championship that year or the year before. So these were real good players. And I tested them all in the front squat. And then I tested them all in the rear foot elevated split squat. And split squat, we did it with a back squat loading position, which we don't do anymore, and that's another story. But effectively what I realized is that they were equal. Rear foot elevated split squat. So a one leg exercise and a two leg exercise, our scores were between like 280 and 340 in both lifts.
Wow.
And everybody was within 5 pounds of their max on one leg. Everybody was within 5 pounds of their front squat max. And I was like, wow, this is crazy. I get guys, I had guys that could stand there and just split squat, back split squat, 280 for 5.
Whoa.
You know what I mean? I started looking at this and thinking, wait a second. And that's when, to kind of back up a step for you, we started looking at this idea of bilateral deficit. And what bilateral deficit basically says is that neurologically, the body does not like bilateral exercise. Bilateral exercise is confusing. It's not the way we're supposed to move. If you think of somebody and say, there's a reason everybody can run and jump off one leg higher than they can jump off two. You would think, oh, two, you should be able to go way higher. Mm-hmm. Like if I run up and try to grab the rim jumping off two legs, you would think that should be twice as high as if I let you run up and do it off one leg. But you don't see that in the high jump, right?
No.
You don't see it in anything. Yet you'd think, but two legs should be better, not worse. But it's not. And again, there's a lot of research to support this in a lot of different areas. They've done it with leg extension, which again, who cares? They've done it with grip strength. But everywhere they've done it, they've found it. Everywhere they've looked for it, they've realized this bilateral deficit idea exists. That if I have you do unilateral contractions, the summed unilaterals exceeds the bilateral. So suddenly I'm looking at people and saying, wait a second, not only is this better, safer, more functional, if we want to use that word, but we can use more weight. And then again, the morons, and again, the beauty of strength and conditioning, I always said, is that no one gave up their Mensa membership to become a strength coach. Right? So someone argues, no, you're using less weight. It's only half the weight. And I'm like, yeah, but it's only one leg doing the lift. So that's not really all that accurate. But again, the beauty of the internet is that any idiot can put a camera up like we're doing right now and argue and post it. And no one edits it. No one says, what's the line from the movie? You can't fix stupid or you can't teach stupid or whatever it is. But, we got a lot of stupid in our field.
Yeah.
And that's one of the things I've been saying, in my talks recently. It's just don't be an idiot. You don't, like you said, you talked about common sense. Don't ignore common sense. Don't ignore science. Don't ignore what's smacking you right in the face every day. But we do. And we do because there's something that we're doing that we like to do, be it back squatting or, whatever. People are just like, no, this is the way to do it. It's very much almost like religion.
Very much.
And, religion, politics, you get into all the same things in terms of religion, politics, and strength training probably are all these very dogmatic practices.
Well, speaking of being, kind of dogmatic practices, what are, because I like to hear your thoughts on different things, and I know you've got a few pet peeves. What's one big pet peeve? You kind of mentioned CrossFit, so feel free to go there, but are there any other big pet peeves that are kind of on your mind these days that maybe we haven't seen an article about or something you've been thinking about lately?
Yeah, I think that CrossFit's always a big one because, again, that's another, really cultish, dogmatic sort of you're either with me or against me kind of thing. So that's, and I think all these, the whole high intensity training thing, Orange Theory. There's so many, bar classes. What's her name? Anderson. What's her name? Stacey Anderson or something. The one, if you lift more than 5 pounds, you'll get big muscles. Tracy Anderson. Sorry, I knew I'd be able. So I got pet peeves coming out my ears in terms of. But again, it just keeps going back to this stupidity thing in terms of. It's again, we have all these science deniers, and all of those things. That's the beauty, I would say, of having I have my own facility. And when people say, well, do you have memberships? I'm like, nope, no memberships. I don't want somebody, everybody's on a program. Everybody's in a group. There's no idiot with, gloves and Zubaz pants on, messing up my squat rack doing curls who I can't kick out because he's paid his $49 for the month.
Right.
That, we've created training utopia where we've completely eliminated the idiots. And again, our field is chock full. But again, like same thing, the functional training guys who give us a bad name, who are, drilling a hole in a golf club and attaching it to a Kaiser machine. And you know what I mean? So I could just keep going. I could pet peeve you to death, but it keeps coming back to kind of the lack of common sense. And that's the beauty of, I love the Greg Roses of the world. I love the Greg Cooks of the world. I love these guys who have common sense and the ability to present their common sense to other people in a way that is persuasive. Because you sit and listen to those guys and you think, it's like with me. Most people, if they spend enough time with me, they kind of come around to my way of thinking. It's just that most of the people who need to spend time with me don't want to, because they've already created some sort of preconceived notion of what I'm about. I would say people meet me sometimes and they're surprised. They're like, one, geez, you're not a complete asshole. Two, you're not, you don't look like Richard Simmons. You don't have like a headband and leg warmers on. Do you know what I mean? Because they associate me with this whole functional training idea. And then I always say to people, come watch my athletes train, and you'll have a really different idea of me than what the idea is created by somebody else sort of giving me a persona on the internet.
Yeah, I think when you see videos of your facility and the things that people are doing, it's not standing on BOSU balls and balance discs and stuff like that, which I think some people get that impression of functional training. But I mean, like you said, there's people moving heavy weight and just doing things in a much in a very smart manner that has a purpose behind it, which is what I love.
And I always tell people what happened to me, and it's kind of an interesting situation. In 2002 or 3 or whenever Human Kinetics asked me to write functional training for sports, I was approached by an acquisitions editor from Human Kinetics. I think it's Ed McNeely is his name. I should know, but oh my God, I can't. Sorry, Ed, I'm forgetting your last name. But he contacted me and said, hey, we want you to write a book on functional training. And I was kind of like, I don't know if I know what that is. So I'm not sure if I'm the guy for you. And he said, oh, we think you know exactly what it is. We think what you're doing is, in fact, functional training. And I said to him, so I can just write a book on the way that we train, and you're going to call it functional training for sports. And he said, yeah, basically that's what we're going to do. I said, okay, I can do that, I think.
Yeah,
I think
that's
write a book. And that's, it's funny because, again, and one of the things I did, and it was interesting, it was a guy, Charles Staley, that I ended up meeting later. Charles Staley wrote an article that was critical of me and critical of functional training and critical of the book. And one of the things that I said was that, when I spoke to Charles later, I said, Charles, you didn't read the book, because he was talking about all the, so like you said, balance discs and blah, blah, blah. And I went back through the book and I looked and said, okay, how many exercises were there that used some sort of piece of balance apparatus? And I counted the number of exercises in the book, and I counted. And at that time, we were doing some stupid stuff in terms of, I think we were doing some body weight squats on a BOSU ball or some stability ball exercises that might have been popular at that time. But it ended up where there was like 10 exercises out of 100 that even incorporated some element of a balance apparatus in it. And I said 90% of the book was basic exercises: plyos, Olympic lifting, squatting, pushing, pulling. I said, but you didn't read the book. You read the title. And you decided you didn't like the title, and then you decided you knew what was in. You literally judged the book by its cover, because the cover was Reebok at that time had paid for the photo shoot, because we didn't have a budget for a photo shoot, and Reebok wanted a picture of a guy on a core board. So it was like a guy. The cover of that book is like a guy on a core board with a medicine ball standing. A typical, what somebody would think of typical functional training book, but they didn't read the book.
Right.
And if you read the book, you'd think, even if you read the book now, I said, since redone it just a year ago, we put out New Functional Training for Sports, which is a way better book, but it's not that much different than the first book. And things like the plyometric chapter and the Olympic lifting chapter are practically not different at all. They're almost exactly the same. The things that changed probably were the core, there was some stuff from a core training standpoint that changed. But so I think that's the difference is, I guess with people, I wish they would spend more time investigating things. But we talk about, religion, politics, everything, not having these preconceptions, not deciding that I know what somebody is thinking. And that's, and I think I've been, and I won't, I don't want to view myself as a victim when I say victimized, but I've been sort of pigeonholed as something that I'm probably not, by people who don't know me, who've seen or read something written by somebody else who doesn't know me. Right. And who's never trained with me and who's never seen any of our athletes train. And that's one of the reasons we have a very much an open door policy. I love for people to come in and watch. People come in, and I've had whether it was in a team setting when I was at Boston University or whether it was the last couple of years I've been working with the women's Olympic ice hockey team. People come in and they're fascinated, like, oh my, like your athletes, like, they're strong, they're fast, they're great lifters, and I'm like, yeah, they're really good athletes, and they would be nothing like what you'd think they were going to be. So
yeah, that's really, again, kind of a judging a book by its cover, literally.
Yeah,
in
exactly.
That situation. All right, Coach, I know I could spend another couple hours asking you questions here, but we're going to wrap up with just a few questions that I like to ask everybody that jumps on the show. And the first one, being a golf and fitness podcast, I got to ask, Caddyshack or Happy Gilmore?
Oh, absolutely Happy Gilmore. I love Happy Gilmore.
Nice.
In my years with the Red Sox, I think I watched Happy Gilmore. It seemed to be every Saturday morning that there was a game, we would end up sitting there watching Happy Gilmore. So
really?
Yeah, very popular movie in baseball clubhouses around the world, probably.
I didn't know that. That's good to know.
Yeah.
If you could play 18 holes of golf, and I know you said you're not a golfer, but if you could play 18 holes of golf with anyone in the world, past or present, who would it be and where would you play?
I have no idea where I'd play, but I would definitely go with my father. I think one of my great regrets, my dad died when I wouldn't say really young, but I was 25, and it was interesting. So I was a really good student in school. But when my dad died, I was basically starting my coaching career as a very part-time coach and a very full-time bartender. And I think sometimes my dad kind of looked like everybody else. Or maybe he didn't, or I felt like he did. But, hey, I thought this guy would amount to more than this. I didn't think he'd end up, tending bar every Friday, Saturday, Sunday, and coaching at a local university. So I really would love to get that opportunity to go back and just be like, hey, I did okay. I'm doing all right. And, you hope, if you're a religious person, whatever, you believe in God, you believe in heaven, you hope that he's looking at you and thinking, yeah, you did really well. But so that would absolutely be my first choice.
Yeah. I got a feeling he'd be pretty proud with,
Thank you.
That you're not known for your bartending skills. You're known more for your coaching skills, at least in the nationwide world, internationally.
That's right.
All right. If golf was like baseball, speaking of baseball clubhouses, and you could pick a song to walk up to the first tee box, what is Coach Mike Boyle's song?
I thought about this one. The Lonesome Loser by Little River Band. Because I'd be brutal. I can't play.
I love it.
I always say to my wife, whenever I'm someplace and I'm by myself, I'll send her pictures of the Lonesome Loser, me just sitting at the bar with a beer by myself. So that would absolutely be my walk-up song.
I love it. All right, what has you most excited with your career, everything that's going on with Mike Boyle Strength and Conditioning, and everything happening in your world these days?
What has me most excited, in all honesty, is being a dad and getting to watch my kids play. My daughter is starting to play college hockey. They have their first scrimmage in a couple weeks. My son just started up again. He's a pretty good hockey and lacrosse player. And the truth is, I'm on the downside of the slope here in terms of I'm really excited. I guess I'm really excited about our staff. I'm really excited about like the Kevin Carrs of the world and the Marco Sanchez and the Ken Whittiers and the Steve Bigelows and all these unbelievable kids that I have working with me who are going to be able to carry on what we're doing in a really good way. But I'm most excited about being a dad and about being able to see my kids play. I'm way past it's funny. I was saying to somebody the other day, I've got 2 national championship rings and a World Series ring, and they're in a box someplace, in a drawer, closed up. And I don't, I can't say I don't really care because I love the fact that I did do that and that I did earn those things. But once you do it, you're like, whatever, will I go down in history as a really good dad? That to me will be a much bigger contribution and something that I'll be way prouder of. If I get the chance to live 20 more years, and be able to look back and have my kids think, yeah, you're really good and you made it to all my games. Because I think there's so many people in our field who miss a lot. And I'll probably get way too philosophical for you on this, but there's all this I missed a lot of these things, but I did it for you. And I'm like, no, you didn't. You did it for yourself. Don't tell me, you're not doing it for your kids, especially some of these coaches that are making millions of dollars now. You're not doing it for your kids. you get to a certain point financially, you got a couple $1 million in the bank, you're all set. You're going to be fine. You should go to the games. And I forget who it was, but somebody had posted that he told, it might have been Bruce Arians, who said he'd fire the guys on his staff if they skipped one of their kids' games. And I thought that's a really good message. That's the kind of message a successful coach should be sending to his staff, saying, because the truth is, it doesn't really, ultimately at the end of the day, none of this stuff's going to matter. But your relationship with your kids and how they view you, that will really matter. That's something that will literally last into your old age. So I think that's what I'm really most excited about. I can't wait. My son's got games this weekend. He starts playing, and my daughter plays in 2 weeks, and I'm going to drive 6 hours to see her play, and then I'm going to drive 5 hours back to see my son play.
That's awesome. As a dad of 3, and I've got youngsters, I can totally relate. My son just started playing club soccer, and like the mornings that he has practice, I look forward to that evening to get into his practice. And you're right. I think that's what it's all about, and you can't get those times back no matter how hard you work and whatever you do.
It's a great. I don't know if you follow the Successory series of books, but they've got a great book called "To a Child Love is Spelled Time." And that's the reality of the situation. My kids won't be like, oh, Dad, remember when the Red Sox won the World Series? They're gonna remember when you didn't come to any of my games that year.
Right.
You know what I mean? Like, that's the stuff that they would remember.
Yep, so. That's for sure. All right, Coach, any last pieces of advice for the golfers out there, the kind of the fitness-minded golfers, kind of wrapping up the podcast here? Anything you'd want to just share with them one more time? I
think, one of the things I would share from a fitness-minded golfer standpoint is one, to start training. I think you see so many of these guys who just golf, and they commit a tremendous amount of time to golf, and they just get worse and worse in their ability to golf. In terms of, because they can't move, because they lose their mobility. And go find somebody that really knows something about training golf. It's not somebody who's attaching clubs to Kaiser machines, but and spend. Think about it. If you'd spend 1/10 of the amount of time that you'd actually spend on golf on your body, you'd probably be able to golf significantly longer and significantly better. So if you said, some of these guys, because what's it take? 3-4 hours to play 18 holes, and some of these guys might do that 2 or 3 times a week. If you said, hey, if you devote 2 hours or 2 45-minute sessions to actually, taking care of your body, because I wrote these articles. I wrote an article in Time called Only One Body, and I used a car analogy. I said, what if your parents had given you one car when you were 16 and said, this is it. This is how cars work. You get one, and you got to milk it for as long as you possibly can. You would be really, really good to that car, knowing that, wow, this is it. Like, I don't get another one. But you get one body, and then you treat it like shit. And then you wonder why it breaks down on you. And you get all bummed out about, oh my God, I'm falling apart. But you're falling apart because your maintenance system sucks. or you don't even have one. You're putting sand in your gas tank, and you're running on bald tires, and you haven't had your oil changed in 5 years, and you're wondering why your car's breaking down. But it's amazing that we will spend, and this is what I said in the article, we'll spend way more time and energy on our car than we will on ourselves, which is pretty stupid. I have one of my very, very wealthy clients gave me great advice one time, and it's become my biggest sales pitch. He said, Mike, we're all going to spend money on our bodies. We just have to decide when. He said it might be a really nice casket. He said it might be a great nursing home. He said it might be one of those, motorized chairs that gets you up and down the stairs. Or he said it might be somebody like me who pays you, and who pays a massage therapist, and who pays a Pilates instructor, and who pays. He said I'm paying ahead of time. He said, with the idea that I know I'm going to pay. And whenever I get any of my wealthy clients who are crying, I'm like, hey, you decide. It's entirely, and that's the beauty. Like, if you're a golf fitness guy, it's the best pitch in the world, because there aren't a lot of poor people playing golf. There's not a lot of poor people at the country club. And, when you can say to somebody like, hey, you're going to spend the money. You just got to decide when. And I think for that golfer, that's the pitch right there, is that, you want to play, I get it. But do you want to play, as you said, do you want to play 20 more years or 20 more rounds? I think if it was me, I'd prefer 20 more years. which means spending that time on sort of, on food, on supplements, on a trainer, use some of that disposable income that you have to your advantage. And your life, never mind your golf, but your life will be better.
Yeah.
Everything will be better. Your health will be better. I think that's the beauty of what we're doing in the fitness world. I always said, I'm selling the easiest thing to sell in the world. I'm selling health. I'm selling wellness. I'm selling the ability of you to feel better. I mean, it should really be a fairly easy product to sell. That's why sometimes when people think, "Oh, you guys are having such great success from a business standpoint," I'm like, easy product.
And once again, makes so much sense. Just we put the time in one way or the other. It's going to happen. So.
Yeah, exactly.
Awesome, Coach. Well, once again, I can't thank you enough for the time this morning. It's absolutely an honor to have you on. And I was just having a conversation with a client of mine who, is kind of in the golf world. And we were talking about very successful golf instructors and pros at different clubs. And he said that, one of the ways that he looks at a very successful pro is by the people that have worked under him and the things that they're doing. And you mentioned how excited you are for the coaches that you have. And I mean, these guys are now people that are training a lot of us strength coaches, fitness people, and we're learning from them who, by proxy, is all through you. So I just think that that's a huge, huge thing as to the impact that you've had on the fitness world, on people like myself, strength coaches, medical professionals. So just want to say thank you from all of us.
Well, thank you. I always said, again, you're too young, but I go back to the old Steve Martin line. I get paid for doing this. It's amazing. Like, you look at it and think, are you kidding me? And that's the beauty of it, is that, it's like every day is like pinch me in terms of, this, like, when people ask me, because when I talk to people who don't know what I do, like people you meet, what do you do for a living? Sometimes I'll be like, I watch other people exercise. and they kind of look at you like, oh, I didn't know that was a job. I'm like, yeah, I just watch other people exercise and they pay me. And people are like, you can do that? Like, that's a real job? And I'm like, yeah, it's a real job, actually, and you can pay pretty well these days. You just got to watch others do anything.
That's awesome.
It's like being a mattress tester.
That's great. Well, thanks again, Coach. Really look forward to.
Thank you. It was a pleasure.
You got it.
I just hope I can follow up the Anthony Brennan.
Well, we'll see. The audience will decide that one. Take care.
See ya.
All right. Thank you for joining us for this week's episode with Coach Mike Boyle on the 18 Strong podcast. What a great conversation, and what an incredible guy to be able to have on the show and pick his brain a little bit. I definitely will look to have him on the show again in the future if he is willing to do so. If you want any more information on Mike Boyle, just go to episode number 156 at 18strong.com, or just search Mike Boyle on 18strong.com. We'll have all the information from this episode and different links. I also would encourage you to go to strengthcoach.com and check out some of the free articles written by Mike, and you'll just get an idea of his personality and the way he writes. Like I said, just very common sense stuff that really kind of gets you thinking about what you're doing. If you're a coach, what you're doing with your clientele. But if you're simply a golfer working on your fitness, what are you doing that might not make a whole lot of sense if Coach Boyle was standing there in the room with you? So definitely check out some of those articles at strengthcoach.com. One more quick thanks to our sponsors for this week's episode, which is the PGA Tour mobile app and, of course, radroller.com. Don't forget about the course that we're having in November with RadRoller, the Level 1 Mobility and the Level 1 Golf Certification courses. More information to come on those in the near future. And as always, we would love to have you guys join our private Facebook group just to increase the community bond between the 18 Strong listeners, the coaches that have been on the show, and the other great individuals in that community, asking questions, posting pictures of their workouts, of their golf, and just having some fun with it. We love the game of golf. We love being part of this community, and we love promoting the idea of golfers getting stronger, playing better golf, and that's what we're all about. So, all right, we look forward to connecting, and we will see you next week with another great guest. Train hard, practice smart, and play better golf.
Thanks for listening to the 18 Strong podcast at www.18strong.com. And remember, train hard, practice smart, and play better golf.